Hello, welcome to the Address of Fear. If you love horror stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. If you're ready, let's get started. The small town in the western part of America was a quiet place, from the early hours of the morning to late at night. It usually had a peaceful, noise-free lifestyle. However, this tranquility was quickly slipping toward a turning point. The townspeople were slowly coming to terms with the fact that the familiar order of their lives had been disrupted, and that change had left a great void in Jack's life. Jack was sitting at the corner of a narrow street leading to the town's bar. The cool air gently brushed his face, and the hum of the wind echoed in his ears. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, but strangely, it didn't bring him peace. His eyes were fixed on the table in front of him, but his mind was far away, lost in memories of the good days spent with his old friends, laughing and having fun. One of those days felt like it had been erased by time. Adam. Jack's closest friend, the one he had shared his life with, the one he had grown up with, the one with whom he made bad decisions together. Every time Jack thought about the night Adam disappeared, the darkness inside him deepened with each passing day. The townspeople continued on with their lives as if nothing had happened, just as they did when Adam disappeared. But for Jack, it had turned into a wound he had been trying to cover up for years. Adam had vanished one night and never returned. Every time Jack remembered that night, his skin would crawl. He remembered his last conversation with Adam, their final argument. Adam had left without saying anything, and after that night no one had ever heard from him again. Everything had ended that night. In the dark corner of the bar, Jack took another sip of whiskey. His eyes were fixed on the surface of the whiskey, but his thoughts had taken him back to that night. That night had marked the beginning of everything. These two, who had always been close, had said unspoken words to each other for the last time. Adam, drunk and angrily shouting, had said, "Enough, I'm tired of you. Everything about you is fake. Enough." Then, when he slammed the door and left, Jack had felt something, but he had been angry. He has to make his own choice, he thought. That night, they had left Adam alone. Adam had disappeared outside the bar. At first, Jack and the others thought Adam had just gone off to be alone for a while, but as hours passed, they realized he was gone. Then, the police got involved. No clue had been found regarding the night Adam disappeared. There was no trace from his phone or social media accounts. No one had predicted that their argument would lead to such a disappearance. Jack was also hearing the rumors circulating around town. No one questioned the night Adam disappeared, as if it was something normal. But for Jack, he felt responsible for everything. After all, he had been the one to abandon Adam, the one who had done nothing to calm his anger. The more he thought about that night, the more regret grew inside him. Who knows, maybe if they had spent that night differently, maybe Adam wouldn't have disappeared. Jack's mind was spinning with endless questions. After that moment, Jack's mind felt disconnected. There was a gap he could never forget. A feeling of emptiness, because Adam never came back. After that day, Jack returned to the town. But something always felt missing. The emptiness inside him grew stronger with each passing day, and over time it became unbearable. The townspeople had forgotten him, but for Jack everything felt like a puzzle that needed solving. For him, this disappearance felt like it would last forever. One evening, as Jack sat in the corner of the bar, a message appeared on his phone screen. At first, he was so used to seeing a new message notification that it didn't seem unusual. But this message was different. It didn't contain any name, only a number, with the word Adam written at the beginning of the message. Jack's heart began to race. He opened it immediately. The message contained only a few words. "Do you remember the night you left me?" After reading the message, Jack almost dropped his phone. His mind had gone blurry. In that moment, he could feel his heartbeat pounding. Was it really Adam? Had it really been Adam who wrote this? No one had been able to reach him since he went missing. Jack's mind was racing with wild thoughts. Who sent this message? The message, reminding him of that horrible night no one else knew about. Was it really from Adam? Jack nervously checked his phone again. but he couldn't see the same message. He tried to make sense of the moment, but nothing seemed to make any logical sense. Adam's disappearance, that night's argument, everything had been buried. And now, years later, this message. Was it really from Adam, or was it a prank? No one understood Jack, but one thing was certain. This message was more than just a reminder. Jack would soon have to confront the reality behind his old friend's disappearance and the truth hidden in this message. Jack trembled as he gripped his phone. In that moment, the town's quiet, peaceful evening air suddenly felt oddly disturbed. It was as if everything had frozen in an instant. As his fingers hovered over the message, his eyes focused on the text on the screen. But for a few seconds, he didn't want to truly see the contents of the message. Fear and indecision held him back, and for a moment he almost decided not to open it. Still, curiosity overcame him, and he slid his finger across the screen to open the message. "Do you remember the night you left me?" This simple sentence froze Jack's heart. The sender of the message seemed to capture that moment perfectly. Jack was now face to face with a sharp reminder that would bring back the darkest corners of his past. That night, the night they had abandoned Adam, something had occurred that the townspeople could never explain with a single word. Jack slowly began to realize the meaning behind this message and the weight of the responsibility he had taken on with Adam's disappearance. As Jack stared at the empty space beneath the words on his phone screen, a series of thoughts raced through his mind. At first, he tried to make sense of how real the message was. Is this really Adam sending it? He asked himself. Yes, the message certainly seemed like it came from Adam. But how? Adam had been missing for over a week. No one had heard from him. Their last conversation, that fight. After everything, Adam had vanished, never to return. Before he disappeared, Adam had even said he wouldn't come back after that final argument. Jack read the message over and over. As he absorbed the meaning of the words, he went back and forth between regret and fear. It was impossible to forget that night no matter how much he wanted to. The more he remembered it, the heavier the guilt grew inside him. "Do you remember the night you left me?" Adam remembered that night, the night he was abandoned. But Jack had never forgotten the hours that followed. Adam had been left alone, and Jack had done nothing to help him. The voices echoing in his mind caused his guilt to grow stronger. Maybe if they hadn't left Adam alone that night, nothing would have gone wrong. But that night, the argument they had and the things they said to each other had led to the end of everything. When Adam walked away, no one had ever imagined he would disappear. But now, with a message, that disappearance had come to life again. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, holding the phone in his hands, and took a deep breath. There was a void. He checked the screen again, looking to see if Adam's number had appeared once more. But this time, there was a change. The number was no longer visible behind the message. The screen had gone completely blank. This only terrified Jack more. There was an eerie silence on the phone screen. Nothing, not even a number, was visible anymore. Jack examined the phone settings suspiciously, trying to confirm if there had been an error, but everything seemed normal. Aside from the missing number, there was no trace of anything. At that moment, he asked himself again, "Is this really Adam's message?" For a brief moment, Jack wondered if this could just be a cruel joke. Perhaps someone in the town was playing a game with him, using the night Adam went missing to torment him. But no matter how likely that seemed, the fear inside him continued to grow. When Adam had disappeared, everyone had stayed silent. The townspeople had thought it was natural, quickly forgetting about it and continuing with their lives. But for Jack, that disappearance still hadn't been solved. And now, this message, years later, had turned everything darker. "Do you remember the night you left me?" This sentence connected that night Adam vanished with the guilt and loss Jack felt inside. It wasn't just a message, it was a reminder of that night. A night that could never be brought back. The mix of fear and regret inside Jack was growing stronger. He checked his phone once more, but once again, there was nothing on the screen. He focused again on the message, But the only thing that appeared was a blank page and an unheard phone number. This message wasn't just from the past. It was a dark reminder from a forgotten, abandoned corner of the town. Jack's mind was in turmoil, his body trembling. Was this message really a clue? Or was it a result of the trauma they had caused Adam the night they abandoned him? Everything coming together was waiting for an explanation. But unfortunately, none of it could become clear enough for Jack to understand. And when he read the message again, he realized that everything was starting over. He didn't want to remember that night. For years he had tried to bury it in the deepest corners of his mind. But in that moment, when he saw that message on his phone, it felt as though the solid walls of time had suddenly collapsed. The fears of the past and the memories he had long forgotten came rushing to the surface. As Jack stared at the message, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Because that night, the night Adam disappeared, he had done everything to erase it from his mind. But now, with this message, he was reminded of how much had been lost, how permanent it all was. The disappearance of Adam, once a close friend, had become a story the townspeople tried to forget. No one wanted to look back. They left that night behind like a dark cloud and continued with their lives. But Jack couldn't forget it. Every night before falling asleep, it replayed in his mind. The more he remembered it, the more he realized the magnitude of his mistakes. He had brushed that night aside so easily that he had never fully questioned what had really happened. Even though he didn't want to remember that night, it had etched itself into his mind. They had been celebrating at an abandoned cabin outside town. It was a birthday party, actually a few birthdays, a celebration of several years coming together. Friends had gathered to reminisce about the old times, but at some point, everything changed. Adam had drunk too much. He had overdone it with the alcohol, becoming emotionally vulnerable. This was perhaps the hardest part of remembering that night. Adam had strangely changed in everyone's eyes. The entire atmosphere of the celebration had suddenly become heavy. Adam had lost his joy after drinking too much. Jack and the others had said harsh words to him. No one really remembered exactly what happened, but they couldn't forget the moment when Adam had experienced an emotional breakdown. Everything had ended with the moment when his friends didn't understand him, when they had abandoned him. How much had Jack and the others hurt Adam that night? It was so clear now, looking back, just how big a mistake it had been. But at the time, no one was aware of it. It was only at the end of the night, when they saw the hurt and anger in Adam's eyes, that they realized how much they had damaged him. And then, Adam was gone. "I'm sick of you. Let's never see each other again." These words still echoed in Jack's mind. When he thought of that sentence coming out of his friend's mouth, a mist clouded his vision. He hadn't paid much attention to it at the time. Everyone had so many things going through their minds that they thought those words were temporary. But those words, by the end of the night, had changed everything. That moment, the lost look in Adam's eyes, the hurt, and maybe even a kind of fear. Jack hadn't noticed it then. After Adam left that night, he disappeared without a trace. By the time they woke up the next morning, they realized Adam was gone. At first, no one panicked. They thought he had left the cabin in a fit of anger, but as the hours passed, his disappearance became more and more uncertain. No one had considered the possibility that they might have actually lost Adam. He had been so angry. Maybe he had been bold enough to leave at the first light of dawn, but the reality was that nothing had been normal. Something had gone wrong that night. Jack lived every day thinking that he had helped the town forget about Adam. But no matter how hard he tried, that night always gnawed at him. The moment when they left Adam behind and then could never find him again was suffocating Jack with guilt. As he thought back to that night, he had hoped nothing would go wrong and that Adam would return safe and sound. But then, looking back on that fearful morning, he realized that everything had been based on a mistake. The harsh words they had said to Adam had brought everything to an end. If they had acted differently that night, maybe Adam would still be here. But for now, only the regrets and guilt of the past remained. Now, as Jack remembered that night once again, he thought for a moment about the message on his phone. Do you remember the night you left me? He didn't want to relive that night again. But he had to accept that no matter how much he tried to erase the past, it always left a mark. The words from that night had caused him to lose his friend. That night, had they truly betrayed Adam? Was that the night everything had changed? Jack closed his eyes and plunged into the painful memories of the past. As he remembered that night once again, he still wished he could do something to change it, to undo those mistakes. But now, with this message from the past, no matter how much he tried to avoid remembering it, everything was coming back to life. Jack put the phone back in his pocket and took a deep breath. The words on the screen of the message kept swirling around in his head. Do you remember the night you left me? It was such a simple sentence, but the meaning it carried was enough to turn Jack's world upside down. He was trying to understand what the message meant, who had sent it, and most importantly, why it had come now. Hours had passed, but everything still echoed in his mind like a fresh nightmare. Taking the phone out again, he read the message once more. Each word dragged him deeper into the darkest corners of the past. Remembering the night Adam disappeared felt like getting lost in a labyrinth. No matter how much he had tried to forget that night, the dark side of the past always came back. He had tricked himself into avoiding the memories for years, but now, everything was coming back to life. Jack couldn't remember exactly what they had been thinking when they left Adam that night. Everyone had lashed out, said hurtful things. They had abandoned him. That night, the town was wrapped in a dark silence, but the pain they had left behind had never been quiet. Now, with this message, many questions arose in Jack's mind. If Adam were really alive, would he have sent this message? This question echoed in Jack's mind. If this was a joke, why now? If this was a warning, then nothing about Adam's disappearance had been normal. After a while, Jack tried to make a decision. Yet he couldn't shake the unease he felt. He took the phone out again and looked at the screen. Despite all the time that had passed, there were no other messages. The screen only showed that one message. Do you remember the night you left me? He waited for more, but the phone was silent. He realized nothing had changed. Maybe it was a mistake, but something was missing. Everything's meaning had been lost. A strange tightness settled in Jack's chest. He couldn't find the strength to get through the night. Still holding the phone in his hand, he hoped for another message to come through. But unfortunately, no more messages arrived. This only made him more uneasy. Something was wrong, but he didn't know what. Remembering the night Adam disappeared created a deep pain inside him. Many people didn't carry the guilt behind Adam's disappearance, but as Jack recalled that night, he was enveloped in deep regret. Since Adam had gone missing, no one had ever really learned what had happened to him. The townspeople had forgotten, over time. But Jack, day by day, felt more and more that something was missing. Adam disappeared, and no one had questioned what had happened that night. Or perhaps no one wanted to. Something had definitely gone wrong. That moment, that night, had been a mistake Jack had tried to cover up with everything he did. Had they really abandoned him? Had Adam truly disappeared? The sound of the wind echoed outside. Jack stood up and walked to the window. In the darkness of the night, the town streets looked abandoned. Only the rustling of the wind and the distant call of night birds could be heard. Everything seemed normal, but inside Jack, there was a void. That void continued to carry the weight of losing Adam. No matter how far away it felt, he couldn't forget the night Adam disappeared. Everything had changed in one night. Jack picked up his phone and tried to read the message again. Do you remember the night you left me? The words danced in front of his eyes once more. Slowly, he began to think again about the night Adam disappeared. In that moment, he realized that nothing could be undone, that everything had been lost. That night, realizing that Adam had truly disappeared, that his disappearance had turned into a tragedy, gnawed at him even more. The phone screen was silent once again. A growing emptiness filled Jack. Something was truly wrong. But what was it? Since Adam disappeared, no one had been able to reach him. He reviewed his phone again, but there was nothing. For a moment, he took a deep breath. Maybe he was doing something wrong. Maybe he had made a mistake. But there was something. A feeling, a fear. When he started thinking about the night before the message, Adam's disappearance pulled Jack back into the past. What should he do now? He didn't have the courage to tell anyone. He was simply afraid that his lost friend might return after all these years. Amid the swirling questions in his mind, Jack put his phone back in his pocket without thinking again. He was trying to get through the night, but he was aware of one thing. Adam was gone. But something still remained. This message was not a joke. Unfortunately, learning the truth might be too late. The next morning, when Jack woke up, the fear from the previous night was still fresh in his mind. His eyes struggled to stay awake, but there was a deep unease inside him. He hadn't been able to sleep through the night, left alone with the thought that kept spinning in his mind. Did Adam really send that message, or was it a joke? The effect of that mysterious message he had received just one day ago was not easy to shake off. "Do you remember the night you left me?" It seemed like such a simple sentence, but it had stirred up chaos inside Jack. The pain and fear embedded in those words had pierced his heart like a dagger. The night Adam went missing was a trauma that the entire town tried to forget. But, for Jack, this trauma wasn't healing. It was deepening every day. That morning, Jack picked up his phone, struggling with his thoughts, and decided to send a message. If he was truly going to receive a sign from Adam, he felt this might be the opportunity he had been waiting for. But as he typed the message, his fear only grew stronger. His fingers trembled on the keys. Finally, he wrote a short message. "Adam." He waited for a moment, staring at the phone screen. Nothing. No response. The longer the silence dragged on, the more Jack's fear and unease gnawed at him. More questions formed in his mind. Was Adam really alive? Or was this some kind of cruel game? If Adam was really sending the messages, what did it mean? Hours passed, but there was still no reply. Jack had gotten into the habit of checking his phone every so often since he had sent the message. The same expectation lingered, but there was nothing. He was so uneasy that by evening he couldn't manage to fall asleep. He tossed and turned in his bed several times before finally getting up, turning on the light and checking his phone again. And then, the new message that appeared on the screen froze him in place. There were only a few words on the screen, but those words were so deep that they left Jack sweating with fear. "If you really left me, this is your last chance. You remember that night, don't you?" Jack's eyes were locked on the screen. Every word in that message felt like a dark threat. The arguments before that night, Adam's last words, everything echoed in Jack's mind once more. He realized that this message wasn't just about the pain of the past. It also symbolized a danger. The night Adam had gone missing, a secret that had been buried for years was coming back into the light. Jack's heart began to race. This wasn't a normal message. They had forgotten about that night so easily, maybe never truly faced it. Now, years later, their old friend was forcing them to remember it, and to pay the price for leaving it behind. "If you really left me." This sentence brought out Jack's regrets, his guilt, and his greatest fears. That night, they had believed Adam had simply gotten lost in the woods on his own, but no one had really thought about what could have happened. Remembering that night only deepened Jack's sense of guilt. When Adam suddenly disappeared, there was something Jack had never considered. Just how negligent had they really been? Now, with that message, the search for an answer had begun. Was Adam alive, or was he somehow dead? If Adam was alive and sending these messages, then the shadows of the past were chasing them. But something felt off. Was this revenge, or was it a cry for help? He stared at his phone for a while longer, but no new messages came through. His impatience grew as he wondered if reminding himself of that night would only bring out the regret, or if it might reveal a hidden danger. No one had really forgotten that night. When Adam had gone missing, no one had understood what kind of story lay behind his disappearance. The message on the screen pushed Jack further into the shadows of the past. How could they accept Adam's disappearance without remembering that night? Was this message a joke, or was it a warning? The questions in Jack's mind kept growing louder, each one unanswered. He felt helpless, but there was one thing he was sharply aware of. Adam had disappeared, and they had never gotten a real explanation. Now, with this message, they might have a chance to change things. Was Adam seeking revenge, or did he need help? Jack's search for an answer had only deepened. As Jack's unease grew, it pulled him further away from the town, where once he had shared many of his youth's significant moments. Now, the town only reminded him of fear and regret. No matter how much he had tried to forget the night Adam disappeared, the messages that evoked that very night kept following him. The abandoned house, nestled at the farthest corner of the town, held the dark secrets of the past. The place had always stayed in his mind as the spot where Adam had vanished. There was something eerie about the air outside the house. Everything was silent, not even a breeze stirred. In the darkness of the night, Jack's footsteps grew quicker with each passing second. Holding his phone in his hand, he was being pulled by the messages, dragged by the shadows of the past. As he approached the house's door, Jack suddenly saw a new message flash across his phone screen. He swiped to open it, and the words that appeared sent chills down his spine. "The door is open. I'm waiting for you." His entire body froze. This was the place where Adam had gone missing. The house, abandoned on the outskirts of town, had been forgotten by time. But now, with a single message, it had come back to life. The night Adam had disappeared was now a question that lingered in Jack's mind. What had gone wrong that night? Remembering it was a reality he had never truly faced. Now, he had to go into that house and uncover what lay behind its door. Taking a deep breath, he slipped his phone into his pocket and pushed the door open. Inside, the house was a mess, debris scattered everywhere. Everything around him seemed to have faded with time, yellowed. Old photographs lined the walls, and broken furniture filled the space. But there was something else. Something that connected this place to the night Adam had gone missing. That night, things had gone wrong in a way no one had understood. And now, the echoes of old memories were rising in the house. Jack quickened his steps. With each room he passed through, something seemed to remind him of the weight of the past. The darkness in every room recalled moments of laughter, arguments, and the nights they had shared together. Then, in a moment of clarity, Jack vividly remembered the night Adam had gone missing. It was supposed to be a night of fun, but suddenly, everything had turned upside down. But now, inside the house, there was a door waiting for him. He moved toward it slowly. This door was the threshold to the dark side of the past. When he stepped inside, everything grew even more terrifying. This place felt like it was waiting for him. Was it a trap, or was Adam truly here? Jack took another deep breath and stepped into the room. The dim light barely illuminated the space, and his eyes scanned the darkness for any sign of movement. That's when a shadow appeared. His heart raced, and as he looked more closely, the shadow took the form of a silhouette. His hairs stood on end because this silhouette felt eerily familiar. There was a strange sensation rising within him. As he entered the room, it felt like he was face to face with the dark side of the past. This silhouette reminded him of his old friend, but it also seemed like a stranger. Jack moved toward the silhouette step by step. As it became clearer, his heart began to pound faster. Was it Adam? Was this really him? The silhouette moved slowly. Jack's eyes darted between fear and curiosity, drawn closer with each step. For a moment, something inside him whispered not to approach this figure. But on the other hand, the years of regret urged him that he needed to reach this conclusion, no matter what. And then, at that moment, the silhouette took another step forward, and its face came into the light. Jack staggered backward in terror. The person he saw was not Adam, but the resemblance was so striking it almost seemed like Adam's reflection. Or perhaps it was a figure of the guilt Jack had carried for years, remembering the night Adam went missing and tracing the mistakes they had made that night was bringing all the darkness inside Jack to the surface. With a deep breath, Jack knew he had to face the figure. He couldn't yet know which answers or fears awaited him. But one thing was certain, This house, this night, this encounter, everything had to force Jack to face his past. The message on his phone had now taken on a new meaning. Jack was ready to confront the dark side of the past, to finally face the night Adam disappeared. But in that moment, he still didn't know whether everything was about to end, or if he had fallen into a trap. Foreman Alta.